What's going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous George and Goes are back with another superstar in the world of combat sports. Future Hall of Famer Jon Anik joins us here on the program. What's up, JA?
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate the intro. It's good to be with you guys. You know, you texted me actually last night. Normally we book way out in advance, but I'm going on vacation with my family this weekend, and here we are about 12 hours after we were texting. Rough night for some of our local outfits, to be sure.
Where are you headed? Anywhere exciting? Can you share? Is there
Of course I can share. We're going just up the state of Florida. One of the great things about living in South Florida is that these staycations can happen all over the state and oftentimes only 45 minutes or an hour from your front door. So we're just going up to Orlando to celebrate one of my daughter's birthdays. We gave her the choice. You can have a birthday party or we can take you to, a resort type place. And parents who don't want to throw birthday parties get very excited when they choose the resort.
The Magic Kingdom, I imagine. Nice. Okay. All right, John, speaking of Florida, I could have sworn you told me once when you were leaving Vegas, you were moving to Fort Lauderdale. Did these floods come near you, you or your family? You guys okay?
Thank you for asking. It's been crazy down here. There's like a gasoline shortage right now. Thankfully, we're about 30 minutes north of Fort Lauderdale, so we didn't experience a lot of that. But the sky just does a lot of crazy things in South Florida and I guess across the entire state of Florida. Oftentimes we find ourselves boarding up our houses and seeing tornadoes rip through the backyard, and there's just a lot of weather down here. I'll go 1 week having to put a hose in my pool because we haven't had rain in 2 weeks to having to drain it because it's overflowing. So thankfully we dodged this latest bullet, but it's always something with the sky down here, boys.
You ever found a gator or a snake in your pool?
We had a turtle in our pool when we emptied it out and got it resurfaced. And I'm not particularly great with animals, and this turtle was like 50 pounds, so we had to get that thing out,
Oh, wow.
me and a young lady up the street. But it was actually, my son was like a little baby, and I was trying to hold the baby so that maybe somebody else would get the turtle. But, I guess they needed the little guns to help get the turtle out of the pool. But yes, we have signs actually in our backyard. I live on a street that has water on both sides, man-made, at least on one side. But I have a sign in my backyard that says "Beware of gators." So,
Hey, John, you're making some bank, man. Soon I want you to be one of the people I consider that possibly could have bought Shaq's house. I know he just sold it.
it's amazing. People think people on television make a lot of money. No comment on them making bank, but I'm getting old, so that helps, I guess, as you get older, right?
Yeah. John, UFC 288, let's start with that. We're still waiting. I kept hitting the refresh. There's the Costa Blachowicz stuff going on, and then the welterweights. Colby says he's ready to go. All you got to do is call him. At least that's what he told everybody in London. Bilal says, not only can I fight, I can make 170 now. The scale's set. And, of course, Gilbert Burns just came off a fight, but says he's ready to go. What is your preference? Something that makes sense, we'll call it, like something that works with what us traditional sports guys like, and that's a run to the title, right? The top guys eliminate each other until there's a clear number one contender or whatever. Or do you co-sign on just, look, if it's got to be Costa Blachowicz, holy cow, that would be bonkers. Do you have a preference in what you want? Now, I know it might be a dumb question because I set it up in that traditional guys like to see the big fights that lead to the championship title. But at the same time, geez, I feel like I'm shoving two guys in there and saying, hey, bail us out. And I think you don't tell the Patriots or the 49ers, hey, can you play on Wednesday? If the game's on Sunday, we know we have 6 days to prepare. That's why I'm phrasing it that way.
Yeah, there are a lot of layers to it. It seems a little bit disappointing that a fight of the magnitude and the relevance of Gilbert Burns versus Bilal Muhammad that could either be a co-main event to Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington on pay-per-view or a 5-round UFC Fight Night main event. I would like to see that get the proper build-up and the training camp that goes with it on both sides. But here's the thing, and certainly Paulo Costa and Jan Blachowicz, that's a nice fight and maybe less relevant divisionally, obviously, as far as the light heavyweight division is concerned. But Khamzat Chimaev is the number one welterweight contender, but he has left the division. So that, and I've said this to Bilal's face, that made Bilal Muhammad on merit the number one contender, even if maybe it's Colby Covington who has the number next to his name. I don't look at the rankings. I have no idea who is the number one contender on paper right now. But because Khamzat Chimaev left the division, that's what elevated Bilal and gave him the ultimate ground there. I think a fight between him and Gilbert Burns makes all the sense in the world. I love the fact that in an era where champions like Israel Adesanya at times have gotten the opportunity to call their shot, that Leon Edwards is trying to call his shot. I do believe Colby Covington inactive or otherwise, is one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, and I understand that there's a case to be made for him as well. So I would like to see Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad selfishly, because I am calling UFC 288 in a couple weeks, but bigger picture, I feel like both of those guys deserve the training camp that leads up to a fight that has such magnitude in terms of their career trajectories.
Everybody in the sport of MMA loves the way you can explain and break these things down. And as the guy that captains the ship on fight night, is your input ever taken into these matchmaker meetings? I know they got to sell pay-per-views, and I know promises may have been made, or this guy showed up, but that's inconsistent. Sometimes what the president says, Dana White, Pavlovich was a backup fighter. He's fighting Blades this weekend. I don't see him in the John Jones talk, and it's happened in other cases. You know which ones. So, like, what about the communication there? I feel like you're the captain of the Titanic. Maybe I should use another ship because I don't want you to sink. But yeah. And Dana White is the owner of the White Star Line. But I imagine the owner and the captain might want to talk, or I don't know. Are you ever on a Zoom for these things? Because on fight night, you're telling us the importance of certain fights, but then sometimes, like I say, some of these things just become other things.
Unequivocally, no. I certainly pick what I'm going to talk to Dana White about. Sometimes I'll have a conversation with Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard and try to sort of, see if I can get a lean here or there. But by and large, I really do try to stay in my lane. Now, there are times where I feel the need, and perhaps I should stay more in my lane, but to go public and either give a fighter like Bilal Muhammad a platform based upon what he's accomplished, or push out a tweet that suggests, man, I understand why Colby's getting the shot, but can we at least acknowledge that Bilal Muhammad hasn't lost in several years? Gilbert Burns is my fucking boy, but he has lost to Khamzat Chimaev and Kamaru Usman, right? So he has had big opportunities, and he hasn't necessarily won those fights. But I can make a case for Gilbert Burns as the number one contender right now. So, I feel torn. I can state a candidacy for a lot of these guys. But no, they do not ask for my opinion, and I am happily, gainfully employed as the lead play-by-play voice for the UFC, and I want to stay that way. But at the end of the day, as Joe Rogan always says, we are professional fans. Our hearts are invested in this as fans, and sometimes despite my twin brother's greatest efforts to shut my mouth, sometimes I can't always touch my top lip to my bottom lip the way I should.
Well, trust me, as a guy that is having trouble separating his lips, totally, you don't want to go there. But anyway, all right, UFC 288 also has a main event. I'm sure the UFC will deliver for us a co-main event. The main event is Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo. X's and O's, man, these guys are great fighters. I don't like to spend too much time on that because I think there's better representatives, especially on the junkie side, like our Dan Tom, that can bring that to the public. What I do want to ask you is this. We're talking about Nate Diaz almost a year before he fights again. Hey, did free agency work out for him? Francis Ngannou, he's kind of going through something. Did it work out for Henry Cejudo? He retired because he wanted more money, the right fights. He wanted Volkanovski at the time, but now we are almost 3 years later. He is walking straight into a title fight. So did the leverage game work, and does it offset not having, or entering with that much amount of rust on your body?
Well, it's a good question, and I would almost throw it back on you, George, and say, what type of juice will we be able to extract from Henry Cejudo when it comes to this particular narrative in our fighter meeting, right? Why are you back here? Is the goal to be C4 and fight Alexander Volkanovski or Yair Rodriguez and become a 3-division champion to go with your Olympic gold medal? Is the goal to beat Aljamain Sterling, who, if he beats you, is probably the greatest bantamweight of all time? Is the goal financial? I don't think he's going to be giving us any great revelation as far as his real estate career is concerned. I mean, it seemed like that was going to be his platform, his financial platform when he left fighting. And instead, it seems like, unless I'm ignorant on this, he's been monetizing YouTube, and he's a G. I mean, he is a brilliant, brilliant combat sports mind. I ingest so much of what he puts out there, but I don't know is the sort of long-winded answer. I don't know why Henry Cejudo is back. I think money has got to have a lot to do with it.
C4 would be historic, but in thinking of that, that's why I woke up this morning, I thought about it, and I said, I'm going to give Francis Ngannou another 6 months. A lot of people are crapping on the guy saying it didn't work out or whatever, but, like Curtis Blades said in a pre-fight meeting, hey, this guy winds up fighting somebody for $50 million in Saudi Arabia. Maybe it did work out. Who knows? But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what's in Cejudo's mind, because when he mentioned C4, I thought, wow, that would be historic. I like the matchup. but I don't like it as much now with him having not fought for a while and the beast that Volkanovski has become.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When the foundation was trying to be laid by Henry Cejudo for a fight against Alexander Volkanovski, Volkanovski was not the number one pound for pound fighter in the world. But it's going to be very interesting to see how Cejudo comes back from that. You know, Dominic Cruz is a guy who right now is the consensus greatest bantamweight of all time. I don't have to tell you guys that he does not believe in ring rust at all. And if there were ever to be a combat sports athlete where I really wouldn't worry too much about a layoff, it probably would be Henry Cejudo. I did worry a little bit when I saw that he needed stitches pretty early on in training camp. It has been dealing with a pretty big welt under that left eye, but Henry Cejudo is a master preparer. You know, he's not going to leave any stone unturned, and I expect him to, if he doesn't present his best version, to be pretty close. I think the bigger issue might just be the opponent.
I feel like LeBron James, and I've used up 22 seconds of the 24 clock, and goes to standing wide open on the 3-point line. So I'm going to get it to him in just a second, but a couple follow-ups. One, Dominic Cruz, he did say that. But it's easy to say when you wipe somebody out. All respect to Mizugaki, but when you wipe them out really quick, hey, you just had a good fight. I get it. But I've heard from 99% other fighters, ring rust is a mofo. So fighters slow down on that one. And the other one, that was an awesome gift you gave Volkanovski. He had to inform you, he had to ruin the moment and inform you he was a Nuggets fan, but I appreciate the loyalty. Then the Nuggets chimed in on social media, but it was all executed beautifully. But that was such a cool gift you gave him.
Well, doesn't it show you just how real he is? That even in that moment, he couldn't fake to me that he was a Denver Nuggets fan and he wasn't overly elated to be receiving a Boston Celtics jersey. It is going to be interesting, though, because the Nuggets, of course, are the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. The Celtics, the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. They're both still alive as we sit here in late April. So let us hope that maybe they collide or the Celtics outlast the Nuggets, and then I can really go at Alexander Volkanovski. But he's just such a good dude, and I'm glad that crossed your wake, because a lot of people missed that, I think.
Speaking of things crossing our way, how about you two using the playoff analogy and conveniently leaving out my team? You guys are sitting there with your cigars and your whiskeys. Cheers to the 49ers and the Patriots. John, you know what I mean, right? Your Patriots, my 49ers. I'll let you guys in on a secret. In about 5 years, this conversation is going to be a little bit different. Both of you guys are going to be sitting there with Browns. You heard it here first.
All right.
Well, that's one thing. The other thing is Triple C, man. Here's something that I wanted to talk to you about, John, was, I mean, you know more than anybody, the retirements, they're coming. They keep coming. But does the UFC replenish those stars? How about getting Triple C back on the UFC roster? Because he is one guy that is battling something that a lot of people aren't. He is battling being the greatest combat athlete of all time. That is something big on the plate. I think that's something that the UFC needs to promote a little bit more. Do you feel like this time around his run will be a little different as far as promotion, fan reaction? George is right. It's been a minute since we've seen him. We have so many new fans that come on. Some people might go, who's this guy again? Other people are going to say it's great to have him back. What do you think when the time comes? What do you think that whole Triple C reaction and moment will be like?
It really is a great point, because there just aren't a lot of combat sports athletes that can lay claim to being the greatest combat sports athlete of all time. Kayla Harrison is somebody who certainly can inject her name into that conversation. But I do believe that it speaks to Cejudo's promotional value that he is getting this championship opportunity, because I think even Aljamain Sterling was surprised when he pushed it out to the masses. Who would you rather see me face, Henry Cejudo or Sean O'Malley? And as popular as Sean O'Malley is, there was a groundswell of support for Henry Cejudo, so much so that it seemed like the public was kind of split on that. And Dana White, at times in the past, seemingly expressed some reluctance to letting Henry Cejudo just jump back in to a championship setting, because other athletes haven't necessarily been afforded that opportunity. But ultimately, he was given that opportunity, and I think it just speaks to his ability to move some metrics that maybe we are not privy to. And I think it just speaks to his legacy and his resume being deserving of this immediate opportunity. So I'm excited to see what he can do with it. Promotionally, you're even giving me some thoughts as to how I might approach it. But I'm happy for Aljo, obviously, to get the chance to add this type of name to his legacy. And the bantamweight division has never been stronger. We're 80 deep at 135 pounds right now. It's pretty incredible.
Henry has this knack for just creating heat with his opponent, right? He could be fighting Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He'd find a way to make this guy somebody that we all think is a villain or something. And he's great at that. And so what I wanted to ask you was, from your standpoint, calling a fight, fans, we love it when there's some kind of heat attached to a fight. It makes us forget about rankings for a second. We just want to see who's going to eat crow. But from your standpoint, calling a fight, does it make it easier for you? Does it make it more difficult? Does it feel any different, your call from fight to fight like that?
I enjoy friction, and I think most combat sports fans really enjoy when there is genuine heat, like we're going to have with Davis and Ryan Garcia in the boxing world, right? So there's a lot of it for me that I can really latch onto. But I don't know that it affects the actual call goes when we're calling the fight. It certainly affects the build-up. You know, I know when I see two fighters go at it on the weigh-in stage that my format's going to change because they're going to add that B-roll package into the show. So, yeah, there's nothing quite like it. Even when I think back to the series between Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington, and I know the heat between Covington and Woodley was even worse, but those were some of the most enjoyable, tense moments for us as we get ready to call those fights because it feels a lot like a street fight, even though it's in a controlled setting because both guys just want it so badly for pride, almost for more than money or glory or anything else.
John, before we went on the air, we were talking about a show called Winning Time, where they go back and look at the Lakers and some of their early years. And throughout that series, you hear the play call during the game, right? And it reminds you of this moment where, like if you're watching a fight, if you're a fan, some people will say, okay, the booth has maybe evolved over the years. You have a lot of more actual fighters in the booth, right? And even in other sports, you have Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal, these guys are all getting into the mix, right? But the play call throughout the years has been a little bit different. And I've always been a fan of that more traditional era. That's great. But I also like the evolution of what's going on today in the younger cat. Yourself, do you ever put yourself in one of those holes? Like, to me, it kind of seemed like a mixture of both. Is there anything that you appreciate from the newer generation and something you appreciate from the older generation?
Well, if I'm interpreting your question the right way, as far as the play-by-play style, I have to be willing to pivot. And you guys and I have talked a lot in the past about this blurred line between analyst and play-by-play announcer in mixed martial arts, which doesn't necessarily exist in a lot of these other sports. I'm watching playoff hockey last night, and the man who I believe is the greatest play-by-play announcer of all time, Sean McDonough, he's going wall-to-wall during this hockey game, even though there are pictures. And our sport doesn't necessarily need that. We do like to let a lot of the natural sound in. I've had to pivot from two-man broadcast booths to three-man broadcast booths, doing post-fight interviews, and not every broadcast is different. I think you got to think at this point I'm coming up on 15, 16 different broadcast combinations, but I'm always willing to give whatever the broadcast needs, and that can mean during an individual fight. I'll just tell you guys, just peel back the curtain a little bit. One thing that I noticed with Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier in that troika, they both start very strong. So first prelim of the night, I kind of feel like traditionally on pay-per-view night, not as much is going to be expected of me because those guys are just so juiced and geeked and yoked to be there for fight number one that they're just ready to go. So, I've tried to adjust. We take it very seriously. We're trying to be as listenable as possible for 8 hours, and we've never had a perfect show, but the goal will never change. We're trying to enhance the live event, and any time that there's a suggestion that we've taken away from a fight because of our commentary, that's not a good night for me. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. I do want to ask you something because you brought something up earlier. Endeavor, right? WWE and all that. Our job is to sit there and analyze everything and figure out, okay, how can this work for both? Can they help each other out? Fighters and wrestlers. But one thing that got me going was, all right, well, what about the things that WWE does succeed in as far as the theatrics of the entrances of everybody that walks in and all that stuff and how crazy the play-by-play can get. Do you ever think about what that can affect maybe your guys' broadcast? Like, do you ever think at any point the two entities will talk and maybe share things like, hey, we believe that this should be added on the broadcast side and vice versa, the UFC to WWE? Have you ever thought about that?
Not until this moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if our chief of content, Craig Borsari, and Zach Candido were to talk to their guys and maybe do some idea sharing. I remember when I covered the first mixed martial arts event of my broadcasting career, Elite XC1, in Tunica, I guess they call it South Haven, Mississippi in '07. And as much as I love that live event, I was a little off put with like the dragons breathing fire as the fighters would walk out. Perhaps that was the boxing traditionalist in me at the time. But I don't know. I never sort of gravitated towards the theatrics. Obviously, I appreciate what Adesanya and some other fighters have done to make their walkout special. And I'm all for the synergy, right? Like, I am not a lifelong professional wrestling fan, but every time I come across it on TV, I can't take my eyes off of it. So I think there's some synergy to be had. I think it'd be cool if, we led into them or vice versa, and we could do some sort of crossover leading into the broadcast. I think there are a lot of opportunities for cross-promotional success, and happy to do my part in any way possible.
Would you like to work that booth?
I just don't think I'm qualified, but I'm ready for any challenge. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would suggest I'm not qualified to call an NFL football game at this point in time. I might challenge that, but no, I just don't have any sort of historical framework for the WWE, not unlike hockey. And even though I followed the Bruins for years, there would be some very difficult transitions for me. Not a great night for the Boston Bruins. And my daughters...
I thought you were going to counterpunch me and ask me how the Lakers did.
No, I'm too old to be throwing darts like that, right? No, my daughters are Boston Bruins fans, but I got back from Dallas last night, and I walked into my daughter's bedroom at 9:45 p.m., and I saw her Florida Panthers sweatshirt as part of her outfit for today. And at that point, Panthers were up 3-2, and Dad just wasn't having it. So I was like, hang on. I was like, you can wear that sweatshirt anytime you want, except when these two teams are playing in a playoff series. So you can't wear your Florida Panthers sweatshirt to school tomorrow. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you can definitely call WWE because you can do anything, is what I've noticed. Jimmy Smith, I never knew he had it in him to do WWE, and I enjoyed his run as well. When you have immense talent like you guys, the crossover is just a matter of like, give me a few weeks to prepare, and let's go. You don't have to comment on that if you don't want to. But the other thing I was going to say was, as you guys were talking, man, I really miss Cejudo coming in those Olympic-style gold shorts. I wish there was still something that Venom and the UFC could work out so these fighters do have that the fighters can show off their personality. Like you said, John, sometimes dragons and fireworks might be too much for some. Dana White doesn't like it. I'm a fan of the stage. I'm a fan of theatrics. I think it makes someone in the arena go, well, who's that guy? Well, geez, I'm going to look him up. Why is he wearing gold? I hear the Olympic music. Oh, wow, this dude, and that's how you make fans. Then when the show's over, you walk out and you say, Dad, can I get a Cejudo t-shirt, And so I really would like to see them, hopefully, under this Endeavor era, talk and see how they can maybe change things up a little bit in that regard.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair. I think some of the individualism has been lost in the current model. And I do believe that if you had the right person on MMA Junkie Radio, be it somebody from Venom or the UFC, they'd be receptive to that. I don't have all the information. I think there are probably some reasons as to why it has been pretty uniform. They have made some exceptions for Bryce Mitchell getting his camo shorts, but yeah, I mean, I'm not the biggest skull and crossbones guy in the world, but I'm all for the ability for these fighters to represent themselves. Gilbert Burns is synonymous with a Brazilian flag headband, is he not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like when Paul Craig weighs in and he's sporting the colors of Scotland. There's something to that, man. All right, John, we'll hurry up here and finish up. We discussed your comment that you think Izzy is the greatest middleweight in the world. And I know that you do have a voice now. I felt like you've had it for years. But now when Jon Anik speaks about something, others react. And I'm sure you got a lot of feedback on that. Was it 50-50? Cosign, I agree. Did you get smashed? No, it's still Silva or maybe another name. Personally, I felt like it's still Anderson Silva, but I don't feel like he's way ahead, and Izzy obviously can't catch him. I just feel like it's a close 1-2 with Silva there. What was the reaction to that comment?
Well, I do think that over the last 18 months or so, I have become a bit of a lightning rod, and maybe I offer up an opinion, and the next thing you know, there's a headline that says, Anik declares, to which my twin brother says, how about Anik just shuts the fuck up and calls the fights for once, right? But I am asked my opinion. I do have a microphone in my face a lot, and I am a very opinionated individual. I think my opinion on Israel Adesanya is the greatest middleweight of all time is the minority opinion. Maybe it's 30% to Anderson Silva, 70%, but I'm okay with that. I'm I'm a fan of mixed martial arts who has an opinion at the end of the day. Granted, I have a relatively high-profile job in the space, but if you want me to sit here and outline a case for Israel Adesanya, I don't think that Anderson Silva's Wikipedia page over the last several years is particularly flattering with a lot of the red stripes, and I do think that that is a part of his legacy, albeit not a part of his middleweight championship legacy. You see that green stripe against Derek Brunson, a fight he didn't even necessarily win. But Israel Adesanya in 5 years has 8 championship fight wins in the UFC to Anderson Silva's 11, and I believe there's no greater win in this series than the win that Israel Adesanya had over Robert Whittaker, and he beat him twice. So I don't think you can overstate the value of 2 wins over Robert Whittaker. Humbly, I believe mixed martial arts is on an incline, so I believe this era to be deeper and better. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to come out here and denigrate the likes of Paulo Costa and Jared Cannonier and some of these other middleweight contenders. I believe Adesanya's era has been better, and on the strength of the win over Alex Pineda right now, humbly, I submit to you the opinion of one man here in South Florida. I believe Israel Adesanya is the greatest middleweight champion of all time.
Okay,
Sorry.
Two things here real fast. Rose is setting up for a 3 again. I'm going to get it to him. Silva has twice as many title defenses. Where does title defenses weigh in these discussions? And 2, I get it. I mean, yes, the tail end of the career, not flattering. The same could be said about BJ Penn or whatever. But I think most of the times when we do discuss GOAT talk or best ever talk or pound for pound talk, we kind of talk, well, not pound for pound. Pound for pound is more current. We talk about the run, and then we know that Father Time pretty much gets a piece of everybody, almost everybody, minus your GSPs and Joneses. More on that later. But I mean, does that not factor in with you? It's kind of, yeah, he's 40 something, but I think towards the end he just felt like I can still compete. The body's still responding.
Sure.
I may take an L, but oh, by the way, 16 straight, 10 title defenses. Could have been 11 if not for Travis Lutter. Could have been maybe even 15 if not for, oh, you need me to bail out the show. I got to fight Bonner, or I got to fight Griffin or James Irvin on 3 weeks' notice. So there was a few things there too. I don't know.
No, I think that there's a lot of meat on the bone as far as what you're saying. Title fight defenses is the number one category in determining the greatest of all time as far as I'm concerned. But the championship fight wins is very much the same conversation for me. And Israel Adesanya in the past took great issue with me suggesting that his first win over Robert Whittaker was not a title defense because he had just beaten Kelvin Gastelum. He felt like he was defending a piece of the title, and he very much considers that a championship title defense. But it's a broader group of the elite great mixed martial artists who aren't willing to have their legacy potentially be compromised a little bit by a bunch of late career losses, right? I'm talking about even Daniel Cormier. Stipe is never going to allow for that to happen. Georges St. Pierre, Khabib Nurmagomedov, the list goes on and on. There are a lot of guys that don't want to have 8, 9, 10 losses in mixed martial arts as a consensus greatest of all time. So certainly for me, Anderson Silva is one of the all-time greats of this sport. I look forward to his Hall of Fame induction, and I regret that I've maybe been attached to this a little bit more than I would like, but I'm very convicted in my belief that Israel Adesanya is probably going to have more title fight wins when all is said and done, and I don't know, I just see his era as just being stronger with respect to Rich Franklin and everybody else.
He definitely has more time to not only catch him, surpass them all. Israel's outstanding. I will disagree, though, with Israel Adesanya. The minute the bell rings, you cease being the interim champion, and you're the title challenger to the undisputed, which is what happened against Robert Whittaker. So that doesn't count as a title defense. And Izzy, don't get mad at me, because at the end of your press conference, you said as long as you spit the truth, all respect. So even though we disagree, that's the truth, and that's how it is. It's not a title defense. I'm sorry. All right. Goes, what you got for Jon Anik? I know you wanted to get a few more in here before we let him go.
Yeah, so what I'm really thankful for, Jon, is that you have your podcast, because you're great at what you do, but there's more to you than just your call on fight night, right? And so you mentioned it. Sometimes your voice gets you in trouble or whatever. I wanted to ask you, Colby Covington, is everything good now? Has everything been squared away? Because that's something that kind of came up, right?
Yeah, I mean, good is probably a fine adjective to use. Ultimately, all I need to make sure is that the professional nature of our relationship is such that I can call his fight, ideally have a fighter meeting with him before his fight. We have discussed things privately, and, I do think that I have to be careful when it seems like I might be backing one welterweight candidate over another. So my first order of business with Colby, whatever he had said however threatening, right? And I didn't feel particularly threatened, right? It was Colby Covington in character as far as I was concerned. But I just have to take very seriously when a professional athlete on this roster, low profile, high profile, is upset with something that I have said. So I had to attack that layer first. And I think Colby and I are in a pretty good place. And, I'm excited for whatever is next for him. I've always had a great relationship with him. And I guess one thing that I took issue with a little bit was our interaction in London. It was amicable, but this wasn't me, kissing his ass per se. This was me just acknowledging my appreciation for him weighing in as the backup. It was a very short interaction. And, I've always really maintained a positive relationship with the guy up until what happened with Bilal. So, I got love for the man, and, I hope he'll let me do my job whenever the time comes.
This isn't necessarily directed towards Colby. It's just directed towards athletes in general. Growing up for us, you had your sports center, but then you had to open up the paper and hear what people thought. And you didn't hear people's opinion until you showed up at school the next day or work or whatever. Now you're getting people's opinions on your phone every second. How do you think athletes have kind of evolved into, not just getting that criticism when you read the newspaper or open up a magazine, just getting it 24/7? What do you think that's like? George and I talk about it sometimes, and some athletes seem to be able to take it in stride, and then some athletes, they're a little sensitive. How do you think that all plays out? And not just for athletes, I'm sure you probably have to come across this sometimes.
Well, right. I'm not a professional athlete, but my profile didn't sort of elevate until I was an old man, right? So I think for a lot of these professional athletes, they're charged with having this social media voice and developing this brand if they so choose. And they're young men who still oftentimes, and women, can't get out of their own way. I have said in almost every interview I've done that at 27 years old, I couldn't pay my rent and I was an idiot. I was grasping at straws, right? Felt a lot more comfortable in my own skin 10 years later at 37. So I give these athletes a lot of credit. I get frustrated sometimes when I see an athlete just totally disengage because of the criticism. And it's easier said than done to have a thick skin, right? I mean, the way some of this stuff rolls off my back in terms of the criticism that I don't think is warranted. Obviously, the constructive criticism, I'll eat that stuff breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But the criticism that maybe I don't think is warranted rolls off my back in a different way at 44 than it did at 31 years of age. So I feel like the professional athlete of this era does have a wisdom that maybe the previous generation did not, but it's really, really challenging, when you win a fight even and people don't think you've won that fight. Oftentimes the venom can be worse than if you've lost a fight that the masses think you actually won. So I give our roster a lot of credit for navigating what can be a very challenging space.
Jon, I want to be respectful of your time. Are you good? I got some rapid fire, but if not, we'll wrap up. We've already gone over half hour. Okay.
Hit me, brother.
Do the Aniks watch the pay-per-views at home, and what's that experience like for them?
So my twin brother watches by himself. Oftentimes my wife just can't stay up past 10 p.m. Eastern time because she's hitting it hard with one of our 3 kids, usually at 5 a.m. But my twin brother is locked and loaded. And candidly, bro, he didn't even come to UFC 287 in Miami, which is 55 minutes from his front door because he enjoys the pay-per-view experience so much. He's selective at times with which shows he actually attends, but nothing makes me happier than to have my twin bro, sitting right behind the broadcast booth. But yeah, he's really the one who ingest this stuff at the rate that I do.
All respect to Jason, but I kind of meant your kids.
Oh, so
they're older now.
So my daughter came to UFC 287 for the first time. She's 11 years old. She did leave after the Masvidal Burns fight because she was absolutely exhausted. I knew she probably couldn't stay up for the main event. My 9-year-old daughter is all about it. Loves watching the fights whenever I'm watching on my phone. I remember one time the Beverly Hills Ninja, Jordan Wright, was fighting. And the next morning she woke up and she said, "Did the Beverly Hills Ninja win?" I said, "No, he did not win the fight." But she's all about it. She was too young to go to UFC 287. And my son, every time he sees the UFC on TV, he just wants to go in the living room and act it out and actually fight. So he's not quite there yet.
You see one of them doing what you do in the future?
Yeah, I think, my eldest daughter seemingly has the chops to do some form of television. I wouldn't think it would be in the sporting world, but she's already read a teleprompter and seemed to have some ability to do that. She's a pretty good orator as far as her diction is concerned, so we'll see.
I saw a story on the internet that said something. I'm not going to get this right, but something about an older guy took his daughter to a sports game. Maybe it was a College World Series or something like that, And years later, she was now calling it, and he was in the stands as a fan. But just that connection, and then obviously time changes everything. She's older now, and he and those trips inspired her to do, be involved in the game somehow.
Yeah, there are a lot of sort of legacies in broadcasting when you talk about, and even non-broadcasting, Will McDonough and Sean McDonough, even though Will wasn't necessarily a broadcaster. He did a lot of TV work, but he was more known as a Boston Globe columnist. But obviously Joe Buck and Jack Buck and Ian Eagle and his son doing good things in the modern day. So, no, that would be cool for me. I think for most parents, there's some reluctance to sort of like give any sort of appreciable push to your kids into your own industry. And television can be brutal, right? So not as brutal as being a fighter, but TV can be a pretty ruthless world as well. So, yeah, maybe a soft little Heisman push if Riley wants to do it. We'll see.
How much are the producers talking to you when you guys do the in octagon post-fight? Like, wrap it up, let it go. I'm sure it has to do with the timing and the spacing of the show, but how brutal is that? The other day I heard DC he had to cut someone off and rush off, but is that like, not intimidating, but is that a stressful position?
Well, if it ever gets to be too much traffic in your ear, you can always just pop your earpiece out. I mean, ultimately, when you have the microphone, you do have control of the broadcast. And I think only once in 11 years of doing this was it ever too much direction that I had to actually pop out the earpiece. Our producers are the best in the business. Yeah, oftentimes it's clock related. It's never about question formation, at least in my experience. But yeah, rap, one more. And sometimes there might be a navigation like they had with Clay Guida, where all of a sudden you weren't expecting to do a loser interview, but you end up doing one. But yeah, it can be a tricky situation. The more challenging thing is just being able to take a producer, count from 20 down. You become very conditioned to this experience when you get the repetitions. But, going off the air as I'm talking and doing that rollout on pay-per-view in my ear, I'm hearing 20, 19, 18, and I'm talking. And for a lot of people, when the first time they have to take a TV count as you're going to break, for a lot of people it can be challenging. So experience wins all, man. You know that.
Tell us something about Fight Night. Your predecessor, Mike Goldberg, used to piss like 10, 12 times per show. I mean, he'd be rushing back in. I think he used to pound the energy drinks. I don't know. But how about you? Is there something we don't know about you that happens on Fight Night consistently, whether it's maybe your twin brother maybe throwing you off your game, making you laugh, or you got a bag of Cheetos? I don't know. Do you have anything that a lot of people wouldn't know that you do on Fight Night that just keeps it going?
Yeah, we've lost a lot of people.
In fact, John, let me say this. If you can tie it into this too, Joe Rogan used to say that before the show, he used to eat eggs and waffles and chicken because it's such a long day of broadcasting, he needed the calories. So maybe tie it into something like that.
So I work more on an empty stomach, right? For whatever reason, I just feel like that's more how I thrive. I don't like to be sort of tied down or weighed down by food. And sometimes even if you're eating the right food and the right carbohydrates, it can hit you in a way where you just want to go take a nap. One thing that I've learned actually recently is that aspartame can actually collapse the vocal cords. So if I feel like I need a little sugar, now I'm actually more inclined to go to the high fructose corn syrup, go to the regular Coca-Cola instead of the Diet Coke. But I've also learned that I need rubber-soled shoes because oftentimes I need to sprint to the bathroom. So even though I have some very nice dress shoes, I need to go to a fucking cobbler and get some rubber shoes, put on the soles. But one thing I just wanted to say, we've lost a lot of people on our UFC crew, and I would say, at least as far as my Mount Rushmore of our UFC crew, I have lost 2 members. Our longtime pay-per-view producer, Bruce Connell, who passed away in 2018, and Susie Freeton, my best friend on the crew, our makeup artist. So I always say a little prayer for them before I leave my hotel room. I always used to have that conversation with Brucey before I leave, like, Brucey, going to do another pay-per-view, man. Just carry me through, brother. Thank you, love you, miss you. And then I added Susie to that little prayer. So every time before I leave the hotel room, I have a moment with those 2. And more often than not, it inspires us to a pretty good broadcast. So,
is there a greater human being than this guy? Swear to God, man.
Ha!
Still shout-outs. Beautiful. All right, we're almost done. Who's got a better chance, the Celtics or Bruins going all the way? Is your heart equal to both? I know you mentioned McDonough earlier. I'm sure you maybe caught the tail end of Johnny Most. A lot of history there. I'm a Chick Hearn and Scully guy personally. But anyway, yeah, what do you think of these two? They're formidable teams. The Bruins record-setting. Celtics obviously pretty hot as well.
It's hard to not want this one really badly for the Boston Bruins based upon the regular season that they had. I am a former Celtics season ticket holder for 2 years. Basketball was my foremost sport. Actually, my mom just gave me this a picture of me playing high school basketball right there. So basketball was my sport growing up. So I always feel an attachment to the Celtics. And, my mother at one point when she was babysitting, Bob Wolf, who was an agent, brought John Havlicek home to surprise her because Honda was her favorite player. So my family is very, very attached to the Boston Celtics. But if you're asking me right now which outfit I think has the best chance to win it all, it's the Celtics. I believe right now the Celtics are the best team in the NBA. The Bruins lost last night. It's probably their worst game of the year. The Celtics are the best team in the NBA right now. The best team doesn't always win, but I do believe the Celtics are better than the Bucks, and I do believe the Larry O'Brien Trophy is going to be on the duck boats here in the not-too-distant future.
1 to 10, what do I get for this? And Havlicek steals the ball.
That's a good Johnny Most, yeah. The all-timer Johnny Most. That's pretty good.
Last one. If Jones were to lose to Steve A, does GSP become the GOAT? Or what's your GOAT? I should ask you this. I think everyone's accepted Jones as the GOAT now with that second title, but where does that stand and could that affect him?
It's hard, right? Because so much of the John Jones versus George St. Pierre argument is rooted in the fact that John Jones is unblemished and has never lost in MMA. So were we to all of a sudden have a loss, that would reopen the conversation, I would think. Khabib Nurmagomedov just doesn't necessarily have the longevity to hold down that number one slot. But certainly were John Jones to suffer a loss, even as a heavyweight, there are a lot of people, as you guys know, that still do consider GSP number one. I certainly felt that when I was with him recently in Miami. Skill for skill, John Jones, for me, greatest mixed martial arts athlete I've ever seen.
John, thank you so much for the time. I know we took a lot of it. Somehow I trap you and say, just a quick one, and you fall for it every time, honestly. Maybe when you turn my age, you'll have more wisdom and see that older guys trap younger guys all the time with these
It's always my pleasure. I know I got to be sharp when Goes is hitting me with the hard-hitting questions. He actually was actually pretty tame on me today, which is kind of nice. But you guys know I always got mad love for you guys, the OGs, and I always got time for you. I wish you all the best with your health. And, when you texted me, dude, any fucking time you need me, you just say the word. Always here for you boys.
Awesome. Love you, buddy. Knock it out in a few weeks like you always do in Newark. We'll be tuning in. We do our watch-alongs, and we just love the broadcast. Whether it's you, Joe, and DC, or you and whoever, it's always a quality squad bringing it to us, killing it as always. Thank you, John. Have a good day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, boys. Much love. Talk to you soon.